welcome to another episode of Bits and Bites from Launch. Today we have a special guest here, Raphael from, I'm sorry, Raphael, you're going to have to correct me on this, Éphémère Creative?
Yes.
Oh, I got it. Okay. Yeah, how do you pronounce Éphémère Creative? Or just give us a quick introduction of yourself.
So I'm Raph, and I'm the co-founder of Éphémère Creative. And we build tech for companies with a social or environmental focus.
Awesome. I think it's super embarrassing for basically BC Canadians to try and pronounce your name.
Yeah, every once in a while I wonder if that was a good idea, but we're both like, I'm bilingual. Like my half my family is francophone. And half my family is anglophone, and Ava's a francophone living in BC, so I don't know, it's kind of cool. Bilingual
works out well.
Yeah, it was definitely a unique name for sure. What does it stand for?
Éphémère, it basically just means ephemeral. So ephemeral creative.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so let's just get started then. So what kind of motivated you to kind of start this company?
So the impetus was kind of like, so a few years ago, I've been working in and around startups for, I don't know, like 6 years now ish. And that's either been sort of as a contractor, a co-founder, I don't know, just doing stuff, advisor. So after working on a couple different companies, I felt like I kind of just needed to get back to, I needed to just make money, I needed to pay rent. And so I went back to freelancing. And I found that the companies that I was working for when I was freelancing, that I felt, or I had the strongest connection with, were those that really had like a social or environmental impact. I just felt good working for them. So I figured I would try to create this company that had this social or environmental impact focus, and I felt like I couldn't do it all on my own. And so I put out a message on AngelList, and most of the responses, so it was a job posting on AngelList, and most of the responses were terrible.
Oh, no.
And they clearly did not read the job description. But Ava was the one person who's like, oh, actually, that's really cool. Like, I love the mission focus, and I love like what you're proposing as far as doing stuff with sort of a social environmental focus. And so we met up and then chatted for a while and slowly started working together. And sort of roughly a year later, sort of officially started working on DC together.
So just because we get this question a lot, is that your recommendation for how to find a co-founder for your company, product or service or otherwise?
I feel like that's so actually I was part of why it worked that way was that one of the folks I'd met at or who ran an accelerator I'd been a part of previously, I reached out to her for advice on sort of finding a co-founder. And essentially she said, if you can find some way to work together for a while and you see that you do work together well, then eventually, that is a person that you can probably then trust as a co-founder. And so it was basically that I realized that I needed like some help, and Ava and I just sort of slowly worked together, like little bits here and there, and eventually we just realized like we do work well together. And I feel like it makes sense. With the previous company, it worked completely differently, and I actually thought like it ended up working out fine, but I think it's just been lucky.
That's not an answer our listeners like to hear, though.
Well, no, like everything, I feel like, anyone who thinks that their success comes with just from themselves is is kind of,
they're
full of it.
I think
Everyone has some luck.
I think it's always like we've touched on this topic a lot through the years through various different platforms, but like the idea of like a co-founder, A, do you need one? B, how do I get one? Like we always equate it to dating, right? Like it's this kind of like, well, like how are you supposed to find your wife? Like there's no formula, right? Like different things work for different people, but like if there was a way to kind of measure that out, I'm sure like there'd be a startup all over it already, right?
Well, there are startups trying to do that, right?
Oh, really?
Isn't there like I feel like I remember there was one called like Founder Dating, and
there should be one for every dating website there is out there, right? So I mean, I'm like, it won't stop people from trying. But I think the right and the crappy answer is it's a bit of luck. It's a bit of, you opening up your mind to not just being able to work with yourselves in some cases. Sometimes it's opening to work with people that bring different gifts than you.
Yeah.
Right. It's not just like, oh, this person agrees with me a lot, we should work together. Like Gina and I disagree all the time, and yet we show up on time for the podcast. So but that's part of what makes things work, right?
Yeah, I think so too. Like you have to find someone who sort of complements you, not someone who is exactly the same as you.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of curious. So, you mentioned that some of the applications you originally got on AngelList was actually terrible. Like, how would you, like, can you elaborate a little bit for those that, might be interested in like applying for jobs on AngelList? I was one of them. That's actually how I found Launch.
Okay.
But what would differentiate, like, let's say someone wanted to work for a company specifically, what are some of the key things that you're looking for? Like, do you want them to have like a profile completely filled out on AngelList, or is it more with their resume, or just kind of like a mix of everything?
Honestly, for me, like I think it's a little bit like if you're going to look for a co-founder the way that I did and set it up as a job posting, you kind of have to do the stuff you would do with a job posting, right? Like you have to figure out like when you post something, like I found if you post on Indeed, for example, you'll get tons of candidates within like hours of posting, and most of them haven't read what you posted. Like they just filtered by something. They're like, oh yeah, software developer, I can write some code, and they send their application. They haven't read that, oh, you're in this field and looking for someone with this background, and they are not
the bot that scripted the application. So
yeah. So I think it's the same sort of thing. Like you have to put information that sort of qualifies really what you're looking for. That sort of, I don't know, if you have things that are almost like calls to action in the posting, and you see that people haven't like used those to get back in touch with you. I was talking to someone recently who likes to put at the bottom of her job postings, she always says, oh, respond with X in your title, to like in your title line for your email, and then something else. So if it doesn't start with like X, whatever that is, then she just ignores them all.
It's an Easter egg system.
Yeah. And so there's ways of like qualifying that way. In my case, it was really just that like I had said like I want to work on environmental and social stuff. Mm-hmm. And like let me know what you like, I don't know, what sort of causes you feel strongly about, or like what kind of things motivate you. And like the responses that I got were mostly like, hey, yeah, I build tech, I do these really cool projects, hire me please. I'm just like, I'm not hiring. Like it says it's a co-founder position. Yeah. And you didn't respond to any of the other things that I talked about in the posting. So
what do you mean my 15 years in the oil industry aren't enough?
Right? Yeah, so many of them were completely irrelevant. There was like one that was like unclear, but then once I dug into his profile, it looked like he was just doing like 20,000 different things. And when I tried to schedule a call with him just to see if he was potentially interesting, he just kept putting it off. So I was like, well,
Oh.
I'm just not that guy.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of reminds me of the screening process and call to action. Like that's actually how Launch did it too. Like, or we still do it. We just have, hey, send us the 5-minute video of answering this and this question. And I remember when I first applied myself, I was like, oh my God, like I don't know any of these answers. And like I had to like Google, and then I was like, well, I mean, some of the I guess Sam's just like looking at me like, well, I mean, okay, like I did know how to answer some of them, but you know, like I did need help of my dev boyfriend at the time to kind of like, you know, supplement my knowledge and a lot of help with Google. But hey, I still did it.
We need to reevaluate some things mid-show. But no, free plug for us. I mean, at the time of recording, we are looking for a new marketing manager. So, you know, if any of what we're talking about is interesting to you, find out how to reach us.
Hey, also, Éphémère Creative is looking for a junior full stack developer.
Hey.
There you go. I mean, this is gonna age well. Like 2 years from now, it's gonna be interesting when people re-listen. 'Cause that's a thing, right? People re-listen to podcasts.
Actually, that's
Oh no, go ahead.
I feel like I have like seen some podcasts where like the host will say like, oh yeah, we're getting a lot of comments from people listening to the episode from back in like 2017. I'm like, who does that?
People
I
in a
definitely
pandemic
don't
do.
That. Yeah, fair.
Oh man. Yeah, I just want to say to help like get a better understanding. So what kind of services exactly do you provide for companies that are striving for social and environmental change?
I mean, we do software development, and I guess like software development and website design. So whether it's organizations who just want to like the pitch is we use technology to help scale social and environmental impact. So if your mission has to do with social and environmental impact, whether we're helping you set up services or like deploy like a marketing site or that sort of thing, or you want to build like an application, like you're building a product to accomplish your goals, or to accelerate your mission, then that's the sort of stuff we can help with. So in many cases, it might just be building and deploying sort of custom WordPress sites. But the projects that I prefer, are the more exciting ones, are the ones where we're building like web apps in I don't know, in like more technical terms. Like I've gotten really into like building out processes to sort of deploy Kubernetes clusters with Django, as I love Django and Python to manage applications and build
Going to be
APIs
really
on
good
top
for
of
our
that.
Google ratings. No, that's awesome. But what I was going to ask is like, you know, obviously I've known you for more than a couple of years. You've been involved with Launch from, I think, pretty much 2015, I want to say, which is around the time I started with Launch.
Yeah.
So we've both been around for a while, right? Like so you've seen everything there is to see, frankly, in Vancouver, both from like a clientele side, from like a startup side. Like what, from your kind of unique vantage point, what are you seeing that's out there right now? Like are more people building, like is that a sector, specifically social and environmental impact, is that a sector that's growing in Vancouver, or are you still getting a lot of requests for I don't want to say like more traditional, because we're still talking about tech at the end of the day, but like maybe it's still like a lot of SaaS, a lot of I don't know, e-commerce or whatever it is?
I mean, I think that there's more and more interest and demand in sort of doing good while what with your business. So like whether it's like B Corps, like B Corps are growing and growing. You're seeing more and more of them, and you see like a lot more people sort of entering into like impact investing and these sort of impact accelerators. Vancouver itself, like as an ecosystem for that, I don't know, I feel like I find it complicated. You know, there's folks like Spring who are focused on sort of impact. They've sort of changed direction a little bit. I've been involved with like a group called the Good Work Society, which is just a really small group of people who come together as like service providers, who provide whether it's like marketing, content creation, tech related services for companies or organizations with sort of social environmental impact. That seems to, like, they seem to be doing all right, like the folks that I've met through there. So I think it exists, it's out there. I think it's growing. I've been like involved with like one of the projects I'm working on at the moment is involved with the Social Innovation Academy. And I mean, just seeing that those things exist in Vancouver, and I mean that's associated with UBC. I know SFU has
Radius, right?
Radius, yeah. So I feel like there's a pretty decent ecosystem for organizations that are impact oriented. Yeah, and I think it is growing.
Yeah. My understanding is that you've actually been to working and living in quite a number of cities, right? You've been traveling around a lot before kind of settling in here.
Yeah.
Where were some of the cities that you've gone through and like have worked in, or have you ever done kind of the remote working travel? Like I know some devs love to just like, get a car that just travel across like Canada or the US and they're just like working along the way. Like what were some of your adventures and experiences like?
I have not done that. I remember there was Shu who was working on, what do you call it? Shu Blue? His
Shu's done a number of things. So Shu is one of our very early launch alumni. He was one of the product managers at Zynga. I don't know what his title is at Zynga. It's almost 10 years old now. Yeah. But he's a mentor of ours as well as alumni. So I think he actually has moved coasts and then back and then again.
Yeah,
a couple of times now. So it seems to be a trend for launch alumni.
I remember him like when he left to go drive down the western coast, and then he went back up, and then he went across Canada, and he was doing all of that while working. And I was like, that sounds like so much fun. In my case, I have not done that. I have had the privilege of growing up sort of around the world. My parents worked in international development. My dad did some anti-corruption work, and my mom did a variety of things, starting with like water and sanitation projects with the World Bank and with the Canadian International Development Agency before it was merged into, or sort of shut down and merged into something else. But yeah, so I spent my early childhood in Kenya, then my sort of middle childhood in Washington DC, and then like my teenage years in Tanzania, before graduating high school and going to Montreal for university, and then down to the States for my master's, and then over to Nova Scotia, and then here. So that's been my path. Yeah.
Wow.
You made that sound so casual.
that's
just went from Kenya to Tanzania to Montreal. No biggie.
Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
where,
like I said, it's
where would you consider home then? Like, how people always say like,
oh man, no, that's one of the, so the term that's used for like kids who grow up around the world like that is third culture kids. I don't know exactly what that means, but
that doesn't sound great. I'm gonna be honest with you. Like if that's how you introduce yourself, like, oh, I'm a third culture kid, like it doesn't seem to have good connotations, although it doesn't seem to be bad at all, to be honest, but just the sound of it.
Yeah, it does sound a little weird. But yeah, I know like a lot of my friends who grew up in that sort of same environment, like that question is really frustrating. Like, what is home? It's like, I don't know. I guess at the moment, like I just think of home as like either where my parents are or where Kristen is. So yeah, my fiance.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask then, like, I know that you've been working in some different cities, like later on when you were working on companies and stuff, like Nova Scotia, were you doing one of the incubator programs there, if I'm correct? Or
so in Nova Scotia, I was working sort of freelancing, but also, so initially I got to Nova Scotia, I started looking for work, and at the same time I was like, I want to build a product. So I started working on this kind of silly idea that was supposed to help you make decisions. I was like, I you know, and like it was very silly, but it was just like, you know, if you have like a bunch of stuff that you could do, like, I don't know, you're thinking about either watching a movie and you don't know which movie you want to watch, or you're planning on going out but you don't know where you want to go, like for dinner. It's just like,
That's the
so
biggest
it was just like
one.
picking something out of a hat. It was literally just that. Like the visual on screen was like, it was a hat. You put in all of your ideas and then it gives you a random one. I had some other ideas for like how it could actually become something, but anyway, it was a little silly. But I was kind of curious about like, this is my first sort of foray into like building products and platforms. And I found out that Halifax had a space called Volta for people building startups. And they are, I don't know how they describe themselves. Just sort of incubator. I think incubator is probably the best word. Like they had essentially, I don't know if it's changed since then, but they used to have what was essentially like a community space. So anyone, you had to get approved, but once you had a chat with someone from Volta, and they let you in, you could come just work from that office space. You have internet, coffee, way too much Red Bull. I actually ended up having problems because of how much Red Bull I was drinking. But yeah, so without paying, you had access to like this shared sort of office space, which was pretty awesome. And then if you had a startup that was sort of further along, and you weren't just some random person working in this like shared space, but you actually had something up and running, you could apply, and then you could get sort of this pretty solid office space that was discounted. So yeah, it was really good rates. And you also had to go through these sort of, I think it was like every 3 months, you would have a review with like I don't know, I forget how they referred to them, but basically 3 of the people who started Volta, if I remember correctly. And they would sort of go over like your metrics and figure out where you're going, set some goals for you, or together with you. And then, 3 months later, you check in and see where you're at, where you're going. And in theory, that office space, you're only supposed to have it for a year. So it's supposed to be like, you get this like nice discounted office space and you get all kinds of resources. Like you get your Amazon cloud credits and a bunch of other stuff. And in theory, that's supposed to help you get going. In practice, it turned out like some companies like grew a lot and just kind of took over a bunch of the offices and just kind of stayed there even after the year. But yeah, it was a really interesting space. So yeah, and it was cool too, because it was really like a hub for the startup ecosystem in Halifax. And I think probably more broadly in Nova Scotia, like you'd see people from different startup ecosystems near Halifax at Volta on a pretty regular basis. Yeah, and they've grown a lot, as I understand it. They used to be just like 2 floors in this small like building. Now they're like, I think 3 or 4 floors and like one of the bigger, like I think the biggest tower or one of the bigger towers in Halifax. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And just to give you guys some context from the launch side, like this is like what, 2013, 2014, right? That you were Volta? Something
Yeah,
like that.
2014.
So I really have a feeling that this was a like kind of like a growth hacking stunt that Red Bull pulled, because at the same time at launch on the other side of the country, like Red Bull would just randomly show up. There was no like rhyme or reason to it. They'd have these, I guess we used to call them like the Red Bull mascots or whatever.
Yeah.
They'd come by with their Red Bull Mini Coopers and they'd just leave Red Bulls at our offices.
Yeah.
And so like all the startups, like it became kind of like synonymous with like, oh, you're doing a startup, you drink Red Bull, like, and it kind of worked. right? Until we all realized that, like, you know, our blood sugar was going to the crapper and like we needed to see doctors every other week. But until then, it was kind of like, oh, you know, you're a hustler, you got to do long hours, drink the Red Bull, eat ramen noodles, and like that was the startup kit.
Yeah, it was literally the same thing at Volta. It was the folks would arrive in their little Red Bull branded Mini Cooper and drop off like a case of Red Bull.
Always a Mini Cooper. It's very strange.
Yeah.
I can even see the image of it right now in my head. Because, you know, like I was working at a restaurant and they also did the same thing. They just like pulled up in their little Mini Coopers, had the little Red Bull like backpack on, and they like come in, they're like, do you guys want Red Bulls? And just start passing it out. I'm like, wow, that's really awesome.
All right,
flavors.
You gotta be honest. Did you hoard Red Bulls inside your desk? Yeah, complete right now.
Me?
At Volta or at launch. I mean, you were at both places.
No, I did not, but I feel like they regularly had enough stocked that I would have a couple Red Bulls throughout the day, sometimes more.
Because what happened at launch is we would get like say 50 or some number, right?
Yeah.
And then within 2 days they'd all be gone.
Yeah.
Sometimes one day. And it became clear later on that people were just hiding them in their desks.
That's hilarious. I feel like I remember grabbing some at launch, but like I definitely never hoarded them. Remember, like I used to work, there's like that, or I don't know if that still exists, but there was like that standing desk area.
Kind of I don't know if it exists now, but yes, I definitely remember it.
Yeah, so I just used to work from there most of the time. So
you're more mobile to the kitchen.
Yeah, you would have seen my Red Bull. You would have caught me.
Yeah, I know you were in the incubator. I mean, Sam always calls you kind of like the poster child of like Launchpad. And
He's been to a lot of our
So yep. You want to share a bit with like, you know, what you, I guess like, you know, this is a really good time to give us like the feedback now. You can be
live on air.
Retro.
I mean, like, you know, what worked for you? Like, what worked for you at the launch space? What did you think was lacking? Like, you can be as brutal as us. This is what we want. We want the real, like, dirty answers here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just bleep out what I don't like.
I really enjoyed working at launch. Like I was missing when I got to Vancouver, the thing that I was like really looking for is that sort of community space that I had found at Volta. Mm-hmm. And I feel like launch was the closest thing I could find to that. I think there definitely is a different vibe, and I think the sort of community at Volta sort of stuck around longer. Like it's a stickier environment. Sam and I have talked about this a lot. Like I think it's in part because like Halifax is a smaller city, so it's kind of like the only place. Vancouver has like a couple different sort of startup related things, so it's not necessarily like there's not an obvious like there's only one. Mm-hmm. Like there's a couple, so it's a community that's a little more shifting. But like I feel like one of the companies that I do some advising for right now, I met at launch like 3 years ago, and like I'm still working with them, and of course I'm like still chatting with you all 5 years down the line, and I'm still like chatting with a bunch of people that I've met through the years at launch. So I feel like there is that community side that I really appreciated. I also liked it just for, I mean, having office space when I was when I was there. Like I know there's this thing that's complicated in like how you build a space for startups. Like you don't want to be just co-working, because then you could just set up a co-working space and it's kind of different. Like I think Launch's mission is such that just doing that's like not enough, right? Like if you really want to help like startups grow and become something more. But for me, having an office space with a bunch of other startups was just really cool. One thing that I really missed when I left launch was no more dogs in my life.
I mean, there's a way that's pretty simple to solve that, but you've never taken up my advice on it.
Wait, what advice?
Well, it's twofold, right? I think one, it has to do with your current living situation and whether it accepts dogs or not. And if the answer is yes, then it's a little bit easier. If the answer is no, well, then you simply move that situation. And then the second part is even easier. It's just get a dog.
Hey, actually, on a side note here, apparently there's a policy that's going to be passed hopefully soon that landlords are not allowed to have any pet restrictions anymore. So
so that one's so we got really excited when we saw that because we're not allowed to have dogs in this building, but we saw that and got really pumped and then read into it, and it turns out that like while it's city council saying that, they don't actually have jurisdiction. It turns out it's under provincial jurisdiction. So they don't actually have the power to do anything.
People saying things. Like the time that Raph came up to me and suggested that I should solve the housing crisis in Vegas. And I said, yeah, sure, let's do it, buddy.
I think you can do it, Sam.
I just, I know you mentioned that like the community kind of experience is different in comparison with like Nova Scotia and Vancouver. Like, do you find that, like, what are some of the differences that you've noticed? Because I know like Vancouver, as you mentioned, like our communities are definitely more spread apart, and there's a lot of different like mini hubs, whether it's like within the schools or whether it's like through different groups organizing more startup events. What were some of the other differences that you think you found, like in terms of like mentality of like the entrepreneurs or maybe just like the community overall? Like,
I mean, I'm sure there are differences. Sometimes I like hesitate to generalize, but like I think the main thing for me that was really probably the most obvious is like I've managed to like I was in Halifax for only like 11 months. But I made friends there very quickly. Like within those 11 months, I probably was at Volta only starting after like the first month or something like that. So I was only at Volta for like 9 or 10 months. During that time, I like met the co-founder of Addo, which I worked on. I had a bunch of clients that I worked on, whose products I worked on as a freelancer. I made friends who are friends who have crashed on our couch in Vancouver. But it took me a lot longer to like make that same kind of those same types of friends in Vancouver. And I feel like that's a stereotype of Vancouver, is that it's like hard to make friends here. But
I hear it all the time.
like I did find it harder to like at launch, like there was a solid community, but like making the types of friends that like I made in Halifax took a lot longer. And actually like one of the companies that I do some work with these days is actually like one of the friends I made in Halifax. Actually, I still have a couple of clients in Halifax, because even just during that short term, like I built really great relationships with folks out there. I think part of that comes with just like big cities, like when you're in a smaller community. Yeah, bigger at least. I don't know. Montreal, I was in university, so I feel like it's different. In university, it's easy to make those connections because you're all in class together. Yeah.
But I know you also spent some time in Vegas. So what was that startup community like?
Okay, I mean,
let's backtrack to that.
That was an interesting time. So Vegas was when I was working on Addo, and we got into this accelerator called the Mill. And so we initially, basically, there was another company from Halifax that got into this accelerator, really loved it, and when they came back to Halifax, they just encouraged a bunch of us. They're like, you should apply. Like, this is fantastic for us. So you should go for it. And we did, and a couple of us got in. And so we ended up setting up like Canada House in Vegas, where we rented this like little house, and a bunch of us were living in this little house in downtown Las Vegas. So not on the Strip, but
Pretty
DTLV. Yeah, pretty close, but it's still very different.
Yeah.
It was actually like close to where what are they called? Zappos has like their little like
I can't remember the name, but they've changed the name a couple of times, so don't blame me.
But yeah, so I ended up spending like a month down there, and then it was a 3-month program. I spent a month there, then a month back in Vancouver, and then back to Vegas for a month. And I mean, the Vegas Tech Fund is like the big thing, the thing that drives the startup community, I think. That, and I guess Zappos and Tony Hsieh. But yeah, I don't know, it was an interesting community. I really enjoyed our time at the mill. They really helped us figure out what we were doing and what we weren't doing. And the way it was set up essentially is like the accelerator operated out of a house. And we would just go work from this house,
like a literal house, like a residential house.
Yeah, like a resident, like the people next door. Like, I mean, one of the founders of the accelerator like lived in the house upstairs.
Gotcha.
But she was part-time because she was part-time. She was working full-time, but she was part-time in Vegas, part-time in Los Angeles. And so she had the top floor is like a 3-story setup. And she had the top floor when she was in Vegas, and that was like her bedroom and stuff. And so the second floor and ground floor were sort of workspace and kitchen.
This is starting to sound something like straight out of the show Silicon Valley, which I keep telling you to watch, right?
It's so funny. Like, that show strikes way too close to home on so many levels.
Like, I'm trying to imagine, like, you know, there's this person in this house, and then people, like all these startup bros are walking through with their Red Bulls and computers every day, and then like you see Bill next door with his, like, you know, watering his flowers and all that kind of stuff. Like, that's what I'm imagining right now.
Yeah, it was very different to that, but it is funny to think of like the similarities, and like, yeah, it was a house that was used for this for this
So did you get to meet like the larger kind of Vegas startup community at large? Like, what would you kind of take away from that experience, other than, you know, obviously the program, which sounds great, by the way. I know I'm making fun of it a little bit, but you know, this is how you guys start to remember that the mill is a thing in Vegas if you're listening to it. But like, did you get to experience like what is Nevada like in terms of startups? Like, I know Tony Hsieh's, you know, set out this kind of ambitious project to make it a hub. Some of it's failed, some of it hasn't been as successful as it's wanted, but like, you know, kudos to him for trying. What do you kind of see in that community? Because now we've talked about Nova Scotia, we've talked about Vancouver. What can you take away from Vegas?
I feel like I wasn't there long enough to really comment on the community. And most of the time that I was there, like, so my co-founder at Addo, Moses, he was there for the full 3 months. And so he got to actually participate in a lot of the activities that I missed, like in that middle section, where they did go like get more involved with the rest of the startup community, and they got to like go to the Zappos offices and like all of that sort of stuff. I feel like I'm not super well qualified to comment on that community. Other than I got to go to one of their, I forget if it's like it's not just a co-working space. I think it was an incubator. And it was a pretty large space, and there were a lot of people doing stuff on, this might just be like what stuck in my head because I just thought it was really cool, but I remember people like building a lot of hardware. There were people like soldering things and like, I don't know, playing with drones and stuff like that. So it was kind of cool. It was like this big two or three story, like, well, big. Yeah, it was a two or three story space that just had a bunch of people working on cool stuff with a lot of fun hardware that I just really wanted to get my hands on.
No, that's
Yeah.
awesome. Because I think when we kind of look back and I definitely haven't lived in deep in startup communities like you have, but like I think sometimes the environment does shape the culture of the communities a little bit. Like you and I, like we were joking about housing and how expensive it is here, but I mean that ultimately does make an impact
man.
on what that's like. And now I don't want to dive deep into that, but I think something else that I don't think is a detriment to Vancouver
Yeah.
is the fact that like it's so nice outside for a lot of the year. Even now, like this is mid-October when we're recording, like the window's right across from me, and it's like, man, like it's a nice time to go for a walk. So like I
Yeah.
did notice that when I'm comparing to like other places I've been, like even the working culture, I'm not here to suggest that people in Vancouver don't work hard, but
Yeah.
definitely like they know how to experience life as well, right?
Yeah.
So that results in, you know, going to Whistler, going to Squamish, going on the island, where people are much more spread apart after the hours that you're locked in.
Yeah.
Whereas I can foresee like a place where frankly there's not as much to do. We're all going to hang out at the same place day and night, right? Like it's kind of like a forced marriage all looks kind of thing.
Yeah.
So like that obviously will have its own pros and cons as well. Like I'm not suggesting that's all, you know, roses and lilies, but I can definitely foresee that in different communities. Like these are just kind of like the environments that people have to work with and around.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And like so one of the things in Vegas that I realized when we were down there is like, so it's actually really spread out. It's actually a really big city. Like millions of people live there. And or like greater
Yeah.
Vegas.
Yet they all gather on the same street when we're visiting.
Yeah. And one of the folks who was part of the previous cohort had a house there, and I forget what her rent was, but I remember thinking like, holy that's so low. And it's like a 2-story house with like a pretty big backyard and like this beautiful pool, and it's like $2,000 a month. What?
Oh my god.
It kind of blew my mind. Also in that same trip, so at the very end, like we ended up going to San Francisco and meeting up with some folks there. And on the flip side, we stayed with some people who were living in like a basement apartment that was like a tiny 1-bedroom, like maybe 450 square feet, and they were paying like 3,000 or like $3,000 US a month or something like that. I was just like, it's yeah, it's wild. So as far as like Vegas goes, and like I don't know how the environment shapes like the startup community. I think there is something to places that have inexpensive rent, or housing rather. And I think you're right on some level that like the reason, or one of the reason people move here is for the outdoors and for the lifestyle. But if you want to sustain that, you need to be ready to 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 pay for the rents that you have to pay here. And if you're going to do that, then either if you want to do that and you want to have the time to enjoy the outdoors, like you got to basically just get a job that pays well. Like it's
Something's
unless you
good.
have money. Yeah, if you already have money and you have money to play with to work on a startup, then fine. But otherwise, it's a little harder.
So actually let's kind of transition to that a little bit in terms of startups, because I think it can be attractive, especially like we talk about living to just go and get a job or whatever. Like specifically for yourself, like you've done products, you've done services. I can't remember if you've actually ever like taken a job. Maybe yes, maybe not. But like, what kind of motivates you to keep going versus any of the other alternatives, right? Like, do you still want to go in product someday, or are you kind of happy right now in terms of the current direction that you're currently headed in? Or like I always joke that, you know, you should go work at Apple and get me a discount on those iPhones.
Well, not yet. No, I'm still, I like doing my own thing. So with EC, Ava and I are actually working on a few different projects. Actually, one of my problems is, well, I think a lot of people with sort of an entrepreneurial spirit have this problem, is that we want to work on like a billion different things, or we get really deep in like one thing that we just like obsess over. I'm more on the, I see a shiny new thing that I want to build and I start building it, which can be a problem. But that's actually one of the reasons I really enjoy working on EC, is we get to build sort of smaller products for a wide variety of clients. And so I get to have that experience of like doing a little bit of something here and then trying this other shiny new thing there. And sometimes they have needs that are different enough that I'll get to play with different technologies. And yeah, but we also are working on a couple things that you could call a product. One is we're still very early, but we're starting to do research. We've started building a very early prototype for something that we're calling the Funding Lab, which is going to be basically a database to search for funding. I've been talking to you about this, Sam, for what, like a year now?
I thought that was supposed to be our little secret.
But yeah, like it's a thing where primarily now we're focusing on grants, but we're also looking into other types of financing that could be useful for particularly organizations that have the mission that we're targeting. So if you're doing something with like social and environmental impact, then we'll have a nice, easy to search database with grants. Maybe it's impact investors that you could reach out to, or venture funds that might make sense for your mission, with like a whole suite of tools that we want to build around that, whether it's like managing your application processes for all of these different things, or connecting with grant writers. Or one of the other things that we've kind of talked about exploring is apparently one of the big issues with grants is there's very little transparency about the amounts that are actually dispersed by the grantors. And so people will see like, oh yeah, this is potentially like $100,000 grant, but the actual average grant amount is like 30 grand. And so they spend what they think is 100 grand worth of effort trying to apply for this grant, but they get 30 grand. Just the amount of effort they put in doesn't match with what they get out. So that's one of the things that we're kind of exploring about how could we make that more transparent. And if we get people applying through this portal, maybe that's a thing we could collect from them when they apply. We're also building a community that is, I mean, you know about this, Sam. It's not exactly easy, community building. But we have this idea that we want to create a space for people who are building tech with social and environmental impact to connect and share their learnings, whether that is like specifically about working in tech in this space. So often that might mean applying for grants, or maybe it's about like getting certified as a B Corp, or other things along those lines. Maybe it's sharing research. But it might also just be the sort of stuff that you would chat about in any other sort of tech community, but with this focus on sustainability and social impact. So yeah, those are two things that are kind of product-like that one is definitely product that I'm working on. And yeah, I do love building products. So yeah.
So how can people find out about these things that you just talked about?
Well, there aren't, so Sustainable Tech is the name of the community space. And so if you go to sustainable-tech.net, that is where you can find that. For now, it's basically just me and my fiance mainly posting on there. Even Ava has not really posted much on there.
Ava.
Yeah, very disappointing. but yeah, it's there, and it's hopefully going to grow someday.
Or maybe a better question is how can people connect with you? What's the easiest way to connect with you? Like maybe they got a project they're interested in. Maybe they want to dive more into grants with you. Maybe they want to talk shop, or maybe they just want to see how many Red Bulls you can drink. Like what's the best way for people to connect with you?
Probably just heading over to fmair.ca. And that'll make it a lot easier than typing out éphémèrecreative.ca. So yeah, I mean, that's our website. That's probably the easiest way to get in touch with me, or Raphael at éphémèrecreative.ca. But yeah.
We'll have those all listed on the podcast description. So for those of you that are listening, don't worry, we'll have all hyperlinks so it's easy to access and get in contact with Raphael. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much again, like for joining us and having this amazing discussion. I actually learned a lot more about Sam and early days of launch, because I'm still kind of a newbie, I guess. Like I'm reaching my second year, so I just got there near the tail end of the Launchpad program and like all the community events that you did before we went full force with Maple. So it was kind of nice to hear a little bit more about what was going on before all that.
Launchpad program is alive and well. It's a closed beta. Raph is a closed beta participant, but he's not allowed to talk about it.
Not?
I'm joking. We don't have NDAs at launch. Save that for another time.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, thanks again, Raphael, for joining us. And we're going to close it off. We don't want to take too much more of your time. It's been hitting up the hour mark now. So
no, this is awesome.
Yeah.
So I've been told by our producer that at the end of this episode, we're supposed to tell people to subscribe to this podcast. So if you're listening to this and you're following the instructions, like, does it really work? Because we see this at the end of every YouTube video. We hear it at the beginning of every podcast. So, like, subscribe, comment, leave us a 5-star review. Don't leave us a 1-star review, because that doesn't make us feel very good. But yeah, like, does this work? So hit us up. I think it's pretty easy to find, and our socials are Launch Academy HQ pretty much everywhere.
I'm gonna go leave a 5-star review right now.
Excellent. I heard the upcoming guest is really good.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you.